want to talk to you about one of our hosts here. Tim Walter is he's an adventure athlete and also a creator of unique experiences. And I've known Tim for quite a while, and I am so impressed at how he can take people through just amazing experiences from walking on fire to cold immersion to distance swimming, just amazing stuff that he does with individuals, but also with corporate groups. And Tim is here to introduce what we're talking about here and move us forward. So Tim, can you take it away, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Let's give John a little silent round of applause there, if you would. And just checking out the gallery. It's so great to see all of you folks from all sorts of different walks of life. Of course, we got a lot of executive athletes from Ken's side of things, and a bunch of Grand Dynamics people in here, and obviously a bunch of people from Kristen's network. So we're all here for different walks of life and all here to explore our concepts of fear and anxiety and how we can use those to our advantage and help other people to do the same thing. Just a little bit about the Adventure Spotlight. This is the second of our journey, really creating these different events. So we're excited that you're all here and being part of this with us. Ken and I started out, talking for a couple of years about how we wanted to start getting people together for live retreats and start to explore some of these different concepts of adventure. And so that's our main theme, looking at how the adventure concept really relates to all the underpinnings of the psychology and the physiology and the things that relate to how we're navigating life, business, and sport and all the different applications. And so we're excited about today's topic, and with our special guest, Kristen, who should be joining us momentarily, but no fear, no worries. I'm sure she's going to show up at any moment. And if she doesn't, then we'll.
She's always late.
We'll keep. Yeah. Oh, she's always late. Yeah, perfect. That's good to know. Great. So we're excited about today's. Thank you. And what we're going to do to get things kicked off before we go into our content is we're going to do a little content before connection. And just before we do that real quick, Ken Lubin, raise your hand if you guys know who Ken Lubin is out there. Yep. Ken is our co-host, and he is his company's with ZRG Partners. He specializes in getting right people in the right jobs and executives with new business positions. So he also runs the Executive Athletes Group and is very much an executive athlete himself. Big history there too. So thank you, Ken, and thank you, John, again, and thank you for all of us. So as we get started, what we want to do is create a little bit of a connection. And so in a moment, John is going to send us into some breakout rooms, and we just want to begin by framing our conversation around fear. And considering that's today's topic, we'd like you to just introduce yourself to the other people in the breakout room for a couple minutes, share who you are, where you're from very briefly, and then talk a little bit about your relationship with fear to kind of just frame the topic of the conversation that we're going to be having today. So that's what we like to do in our breakout room. We'll get to meet some interesting new people at randomly putting into our rooms, and then we'll come back and we'll continue on with the program. Cool. John, take it away.
You all ready?
Yeah.
All right, here you go. You won't go automatically, but if you got questions or concerns, let me know, and see you in about 4 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Everybody's jumping back in. Still got a few more seconds left. Let's see.
Me too, bro.
There we go. Oh no, this was interactive.
Almost there. So, all right. It looks like everybody's back. If you want to take it over, Tim.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I, for one, can say, and just in those short minutes, it was great to meet a couple new people and to begin that conversation. If you would, type into the chat room a word or two into our Zoom chat room here, just that highlights the conversation you just had about the relationship with fear. And let's start kind of filling up the chat room and looking at some of those words that highlight our relationship with fear, because some of the conversation that I just had revolved around curiosity, around understanding physiology, psychology, and it's interesting. Kristen's approach to fear and anxiety has everything to do with the psychology aspect as it integrates with our physiology. Yeah, and just looking, wow, it's interesting. Okay, yeah, small world of fear, the unknown, individual perceptions, life restraining. Yeah. And so I'm not sure if, Kristen, if you're actually in the room right here, if you could raise your hand or say something. And if not, just to give give a little bit of a heads up, we are still waiting for Kristen to to show up. So
our fears are coming to play.
I'm feeling a certain level of anxiety of our keynote speaker not showing up.
And
now,
we're embracing it.
You're embracing it, so but I do have I've had the privilege of having some great conversations with Kristen as of late. One resource I do want to point out to you, if you have not done it yet, on Kristen's website, John, if you could put Kristen's website into the chat room, there is a fear and anxiety assessment on our website, which is quite good and provocative. If you haven't done that yet, that's a nice that gives you a great perspective on her point of view, and so you can click on there to take that assessment. And she also has a great 3-minute overview video. And if she doesn't show up in a couple of minutes, so we're going to kick it off with Ken, and we can start having a conversation here. But we could also share the short video to give her perspective on it as we're progressing here. So. Ken, let's just have let's start by having a conversation. I think maybe we can use some of our adventure experiences to frame some things and get the conversation going.
Well, I think one of the things too is overcoming the fear, right? And overcoming stuff like this happening. And what do? What happens when the fear of things happening and going wrong actually take place? What do you do? How do you handle it? And I think that's, one of the things that we're really focused on here and talking about it. But more importantly, the adventure of sort of the motto of this is adventure in business, life, and sport. And it's never really an adventure until things go sideways. So that's where we are right now. But I think one of the things too is another thing is, chat in the chat room. What do you do when things go sideways, right? What are some of the things that you do to overcome fear and overcome anxiety when it's like, oh no, where do we go from here, right? So, I'd love to hear something there. And one of the things someone actually just said is breathing, right? And I think a lot of people, and Tim, you're big into this the breath thing, the Wim Hof method, the fire and ice, and talk to a bit about breathing and the breathing patterns and how that shifts.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I just delivered an event for 70 folks, which involved walking across fire walking, and leading this group up to have the capacity to do a full cold immersion, at 40 degrees, filled with ice buckets. And the topic of fear and anxiety certainly was, at the forefront of this particular event. There are two things that from my personal adventure experience, whether it's rock climbing, open water swimming, free diving down at depth for several minutes, ocean free diving, and a lot of the extensive ski mountaineering that, we live in the same world that, Kristen so used to and embracing. There are two main aspects when we start looking at fear, and that is the psychology and our physiology. And when we start looking at the concept of fear and anxiety, we actually have the capacity to use our psychology and our mindset to change the experience before we've even had it. And so a big part of what I talk about when I'm working with our corporate groups and doing something that they've never ever done before is how to use the concept of our mindset to to direct the concept of the actual experience when we're having it. So the breath that Ken brought up, one of the concepts is the breath connects our mind with our body. And one of the very simplest and most common ways to calm our nerves and anxiety is to connect in with our breathing. There are lots of different techniques to be able to do that, but certainly, getting connected with our breathing is one of the foundational tool sets. The other thing that I want to talk around the psychology is that Kristen, her main framework around this whole topic is changing the relationship with fear. So imagine, if you would, that your fear is like a small child that is standing next to you, right? It's actually, fear is a person. Now, if you have this person called fear sitting next to you, and you start to experience this thing giving you some sort of an emotional signal, how would you choose to interact with that person? And so Kristen's framework is, imagine that this is a child. Would you want to overcome it, as in run away from it? Would you want to punch it in the face to overcome it and move beyond it? Well, that wouldn't be very nice. Or would you like to have a relationship with this child or this person or this thing, and bring it along on this journey that you are having as you are going through whatever situation you're having? So just that one simple concept of changing the emotion of fear to an experience of being in relationship with that fear as the person that is next to you completely changes the whole paradigm of how you're going to be interacting with this emotional response. And so just to bring it back in, into the physiology side of things, into the chat room, if you would, please type in a physiological response that tells you that you are experiencing fear. What is it that you feel in your body that gives you an indication that you are feeling the emotion of fear? So we have the flushed face, the tight chest, the pain, the heat, all these shortness of breath. So if you look in the chat room and you look at the physiology, one of the things that we talk about in our adventure programming with all our executives that we do when we're about to go rappel off of a cliff, we're about to ask them to do something that's challenging, and we're addressing the concept of perceived versus real fear. What we tell people to do is, number one, generate your own very specific list of physiological indicators that tell you when you're experiencing fear. So when you have this list, and it can be different for it's different, but there are a lot of commonalities, right? So when you think about the physiology of the fear response, if we can tune into that moment, and in rock climbing, for example, when you're going through something very, very difficult and you're not sure whether you're going to be able to make that next move or whatnot, what happens is you tend to overgrip. Your fear response tends to cause you to do something that's going to take away from your energy. And so if you can predetermine these physiological responses using your mindset, this is going to allow you to change your response in the moment. So you become aware of these physiological responses, you tune into them, and then you use the power of psychology to help you address the physiology that you're feeling. One of the things that I'm particularly in tune with is the use of a mantra. Okay, so we actually like to work with our groups and to give them this skill set where, if you can imagine a fearful experience that is something you've had in the past or something that you can even anticipate in the future, think about imagining this particular experience that you're going to have in the future. Now, if you can envision, and your brain, the subconscious and the conscious, doesn't know the difference between actually the real moment and the envisioned moment, particularly if you visualize it very clearly. When you envision that moment coming up in the future, what I also want you to do is visualize the response to that particular experience. So example, when we're talking about walking across fire or getting into a cold immersion or having a difficult conversation or whatever that is, we get people to vividly imagine the response that you're going to have in advance. And when you do that in advance, you're going to get a different physiological response in the moment. So if you imagine that physiological response in the future, what I'd like you to do is think about an emotional response that you can have that's more empowering. And so when you think about that emotional response, you take a physical movement, a word, or a sound that you can have in your mind that you're going to trigger when you get into that particular moment. This is called the power of psychological anchors. And so what I'd like you to do is think about a word or a phrase that creates a psychological anchor that you can call upon when you get into a fearful state. And that fearful state is triggered by what? All the different physiological responses that you can generate for yourself. So you imagine going into a freezing cold body of water in the middle of winter. It's 10 degrees out. It's freezing outside, and you're about to get into a 35-degree pool of water. In your mind, you can imagine the physiological response, the fear of actually getting in the water, the fight or flight that you're going to experience in your body. And if you can envision going in, feeling that emotion of the cold water, feeling the fear of, your heart beating fast and whatnot, and then psychologically say, I'm going to use this particular mantra, and that's the psychology of the mantra. So you're saying, I'm staying calm, I'm staying relaxed, I'm breathing, and you have this mantra when you're going into the fearful state. And when you actually experience that, then the mantra actually brings you into a place of a calmer physiology. So those are a couple concepts that I have that I wanted to share. Ken, what are your thoughts on some of those ideas or other concepts that you're coming along here? And we're just so you know, we're all still waiting for Kristen to reframe. And she may or may not.
No, she actually sent me an email that she's coming on. I think we're dealing with time zone issues, so apologize. Hang tight right now. But one of the things I use, and many of my people that are many of the people that know me from the executive athletes world, who've listened to any of my podcasts, who've seen some of my writing, I deal with, personally, I deal with anxiety. I've dealt with anxiety my entire life. I remember my first anxiety attack at 7 years old in a speech therapist room, right? And it's been going ever since. And there's times in my life where it heightens, it goes down, it heightens and goes down. And right now, it's obviously with COVID, what's going on with the last recession of 2008, or the first recession of 1999, it was scary. And it's like the uncertainty of where you're going. And right now, we're all uncertain, right? We're still uncertain about what's happening in the US. We're uncertain what's happening with COVID. We're uncertain whether or not we really are, headed in the right direction with things personally, with school kids, where everything else is going on. So what's happening is, one of the things that I do, and one of the things that people, it's a difficult thing to do. And hold on, like I said, she's, just send Kristen the link in order to log in. But with all that uncertainty, with everything that's going on, I try to use anxiety or fear as a tool to drive forward, to drive me to become better. And really, like what Tim was saying, is the physiological side of the whole things is you're really, your body is really, your body's responding, right, to perform. And that's what we need to do, is get ready for the fear, get ready for, that impending doom that we have or that we don't have. And you can grow. And these are opportunities to overcome your fear, overcome your growth, what you can and can't do. So that's what I do as someone who really suffers from this day to day. And I know, lots of people, whenever I write about it, they talk about it, or they send me the links about it. and saying that it's a, thank you for that, because it just reframes what you're doing and reframes what you're not doing. So, that's that. Tim, did you send the link to Kristen?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I don't know. So what do you guys, if you're in a fearful situation or if you're in an anxious situation, type in the chat room what you guys do or don't do.
Let's see. And John, do you have any questions in the Q&A box? And if you have a question, please include those in there, because we have a variety of different directions that we can of things that we can share from our personal perspective. Yeah, and just look at the look in the chat there.
Yeah, we got one that's for you. How do you overcome, and this is about the cold immersion specifically, how do you overcome fear of physical pain, especially when you've lived through some huge physical pain? The body remembers and doesn't want to let go.
Well, that's a great question. How I frame the experience of pain specifically, and this is coming from, many injuries, from, having my arm just nearly ripped off to having, multiple, knee surgeries and all sorts of different accidents from adventure settings. The front load of the experience of pain can be redirected into something that's more empowering. And so while an entire, imagine doing this cold immersion, or whatever the situation is that you're going to be experiencing some pain, the power to reframe the experience that you're having, the feeling, the association of the feeling, is the number one thing that you can do. So when you're having a feeling, we have an association with it, right? So we create the meaning of the experience, which then creates how we're going to feel about it. So you can go through any negative, painful experience, and if you associate a disempowering meaning to that experience, then it's going to be a lot more, quote unquote, painful. So while I know that people are going to be going through a lot of, quote unquote, uncomfortable experiences in freezing water, and when I go and do this myself, it's still an ongoing thing. The experience of pain, I reframe and say, you know what, this is a different experience. It's just a different emotion. It's just a different sensation that is actually telling me that I'm empowering myself. And so when people feel this thing that could be registered as, wow, this is cold and painful, you can actually say, you know what, this is enlightening, invigorating, and empowering. And just by simply pre-sensitizing our minds and our brain to this concept of redefining how we're going to be feeling about it, can completely change the experience. And so what I've found is, when you're in that moment, if you can continue to monitor and direct your internal self-thought around the meaning of an experience, then that's going to completely change the experience that you have in the moment, in and of itself. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Yeah. So
no, and I love exactly what you're saying there, right? And I think there's some of the people on here we know are big time adventurers, and I've coached a lot of athletes and high level athletes of, hey, get ready, right? And getting ready means different things for different people. Some people go internal, some people go external, some people it works or doesn't work, for them, of which way to go and which way to handle it. And it doesn't really, you have to understand what works best for you. I think that's the biggest issue, right? Is really understanding what type of reaction you're going to get, what works for your mind and your body and your soul. So
who's got a comment? I'd like to just open it up to to someone in the gallery who has a question that you'd like to share. What?
Yeah, and if you could do this for me, in the participant thing, there's a raise your hand. So just to keep things kind of semi-controlled, if you can raise your hand, and then I can ask you to unmute, and then you can ask your question or make your comment.
Yeah. So who out there has a question or a comment based upon some of the concepts we've been talking about, the relationship with fear and changing that, if you'd like to hear a little bit more about that, or physiology, psychology, a new frame of reference that we can share, or a question that you'd like to ask. Now's your chance. If you're feeling fear and
Elise,
anxiety,
okay, hi.
ask me a
Hi, I'm
question.
Elise. I have two things going on in my life right now that I would really love some input on, in terms of, like, not only in terms of a major business negotiation where, you know, an entire next 5 years could be affected by the deal, and the fear of not getting what I want from the deal, of it being a lot of compromises, or not enough income, or not enough protection creatively. And also in relationship, and fear of changing, and endings in relationships. So just beyond just the immediate experience of a physical, in a sports context, I'm looking at much broader scenarios on how fear can stop us, or how to cope with fear to move forward freely.
No, absolutely. And I believe Kristen just joined us. So, but just to add a couple of comments to that, one of my favorite sort of educators that talks a lot about his experience with fear is Tim Ferriss. Has a great podcast on the topic. And one of the tools that he recommends, and specifically some of these things that are very future oriented, is to write down your list of worst case scenarios. So what is possibly the worst case scenario in this situation, in this business negotiation, in the relationship? You know, what's the possible worst case scenario that could come out of it? And what we find is the reality of what the worst case scenario is oftentimes really isn't that bad. And as you list your worst case scenarios, ask the question, what if this scenario was actually a great one? So if a relationship were to end, you're having a fear and anxiety of a relationship not working out, and here's all of the lists of the worst case scenarios in that relationship ending. And then say, you know what if this relationship ending was actually one of the greatest things that could possibly happen to me? And then write all the list of the other side. And just going through this experiment or whatever will often dispel a lot of the things in the mental chatter and anxiety that comes up with holding a lot of fear and anxiety. So
Kristen is in the room if we want to transition over to more of the interview portion.
And Kristen, welcome.
Hi.
Hey, our fears came.
My apologies. I think our times got messed up because these guys are on the East Coast and I'm Mountain Time, and I somehow got it in my head that this was at 3 o'clock today. I am so sorry.
It's okay. Let's jump right into the topic. So we've been talking a lot about perspectives on fear. I had been kind of filling in and framed a little bit about changing the relationship with fear. I talked about physiology and psychology and some things like that. But if you could dive right into your perspective on how we can change the paradigm of fear in relation to forming a new relationship with fear, that would be, I think, a great way to start. And then Ken, you can jump in and ask more questions. But Kristen, if you could just dive right into that, that'd be great.
Here, hold on, Kristen, let's do this a little bit more formal. I'll give you a little bit the formal intro. So Kristen is awesome. She's been on my podcast. Her book is The Art of Fear, that anyone who has it should go out there, should buy it, should download it. She's like many of us. She's an outdoor athlete. She was actually one of the top extreme skiers for 12 years, ex-US ski teamer. There's, a number of those on here are part of our world. But more importantly, she's studied, fear and anxiety and really the tools behind it and how to really look at it differently, because we're all told to look at things the same, right? And how we look at everything out there has been, sort of the gurus are saying, do this, do this, do this. And, one of the things I'm a bit of look at things differently and iconoclast a little bit and my theories and things that happen. And Kristen really is that person as well. And what she has done, the advice she gives, her insight is second to none. So, Kristen, and like I said, this whole thing is called the adventure spotlight for a reason. It's never an adventure until things go sideways, and we're in the middle of this adventure. And the best part is we've actually kept everyone engaged. So, Kristen, it's your opportunity there to keep them engaged. I don't think we've lost anyone. I think we might have lost one, but that's it. So, Kristen, welcome to the show. You're awesome. Sorry for the confusion. Time zones in today's world and clock changes and everything's no fun. So, welcome.
Well, thank you for carrying the group. Ken, Tim, thank you so much. Well, I have devoted my life to trying to put the puzzle together around fear and anxiety, which is a form of fear. And we got to ask this question of why is it important to be talking about it? And it may seem obvious, but there's a lot more to this subject that you may not realize. Like we like to say that we're all about love, but the thing is we're also all about fear. And to be in denial of that is kind of to deny the truth of what it means to be a human being. Right now, we struggle with such rampant anxiety disorders and issues. I mean, the statistics are alarming and they're only getting worse every year. And we have all these methods and modalities to deal with fear and its sister anxiety. And the bottom line is nothing's working. It's not working. Currently, 1 in 4 Americans struggle with an anxiety disorder. And it's getting worse because 1 in 3 teenagers struggle with an anxiety disorder. And we're not just talking anxiety, but an actual anxiety disorder. And to the point where it's almost trendy. I just spent 3.5 months with my niece, who's 19 years old, who has an anxiety disorder. And I mean, she is not even willing to look at it because it's so normal in our world today that, it's just, we just think that this is just a normal part of life. And it's not supposed to be this way. So anxiety is just a renaming of fear. We don't call it fear anymore. We call it anxiety. Like we look at like the guy that lives in New York, works on Wall Street, and he's pickled in anxiety. And that just seems, well, of course you're pickled in anxiety. Look at what you do for a living. But if he were to say, I'm pickled in fear, he would be the laughing stock. He would get fired. He'd be embarrassed. But that's exactly what's going on. All of these people that are struggling with anxiety disorders are actually struggling with fear. And so even though I call myself a fear expert, I always have to put the word anxiety in the title so that we know what we're actually talking about. So let me just back up though and talk about what fear is, because fear and fear with an S, are very different things. So we have this amygdala, 2 almond-shaped nuggets at the top of the spine, and it's the manufacturing plant for fear. It's the oldest part of the brain, and all data that comes into our systems is run through this primary filter first. And if there's a threat, then the amygdala manufactures fear, sends it as a shot of discomfort into our bodies. And it's proven by science that it shows up in our bodies first. And it's supposed to flow like water through our bodies, like water through a hose. And while it's in our systems, it's supposed to lead to on-point physical reaction without thought, kind of like you see with an animal. Like Bambi, oh my gosh, fear, she freezes to gather more information, she runs, she flees, or she fights. And then the fear is gone 10 to 90 seconds later after the threat is gone and Bambi's back eating grass in a field somewhere, and there's no residual anxiety disorder, there's no PTSD, none of that. She doesn't need therapy. And so animals are a really good kind of example of what to do about fear. But we humans, we've lost our way. And where we've lost our way is we started to see fear as an enemy. We've started to see fear as not even being real. We've started to trying to conquer, overcome it, fight it, control it. Emotional intelligence is seen as our ability to manage our emotions and control them and manage other people's emotions for that matter. And so as a result, we're no longer in flow with fear the way nature intended. We kink the hose And that fear just stops in our system, starts recirculating round and round, even though there's no threat. And this is anxiety. So what I aim to do, and I have a unique education and background unlike no other. I didn't learn about fear or anxiety from university professors, or I'm not parroting the same advice that you hear from self-help gurus. I have completely reimagined this, put the puzzle together, that what we actually need to do is stop with the language of trying to conquer and overcome fear, get back into flow with it the way nature intended. And then not only will these anxiety disorders and anxiety in general dissolve, so will irrational fear, so will monkey mind, so will insomnia, which is fear waking up in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. Like once we get back and flow with fear again, all of a sudden life just becomes so much easier. And that's what we're talking about today, is like, how can we get in flow with our fear again so that we feel better emotionally, spiritually, physically, and just life starts to make sense again. And now is a great time to do this because of COVID, which is, it's an even more scary time. Like the amygdala is like, whoa, you know? So that's,
No, it's
that's
crazy.
the conversation we're having today.
And talk to a bit about, I think a lot of people here understand flow state, right? And really what's going on out there. And fear and anxiety keeps you out of flow state. And you've got a pretty good methodology, right? 4 different thoughts or 4 different words that you use. Talk to us a bit about those words and dealing with, fear and anxiety.
Well, fear does not keep us out of a flow state. Let's be crystal clear about
I like that. Yep.
Right.
And probably puts you in it, right?
Right.
Sometimes.
Well, certainly with sports. And this is a great way to actually introduce the 4 levels in which we deal with fear. The first level, and I'm going to rank I see it basically that there's 4 ways that people deal with fear. And I'm going to rank them from worst way to deal with fear to best way to deal with fear. And the first way, 100% of us do this some of the time because of our cultural norms. And it's the worst way to deal with fear there is. Probably 99.9% of us do this all of the time, which is we're in some form of resistance to fear. Resistance can show up in, fighting it, ignoring it, trying to control it, running away from it, being in our heads, trying to understand it, which is a way to not have to be in our bodies and feel it. So just know that resistance comes in many forms. The second way to deal with it is we accept it. And it's a step in the right direction, but it's only level 2. Level 3 is where we learn how to embrace that fear. And level 4 is where we become intimate with the fear. If we can get to level 3 or level 4 with our fear, where we embrace it and we become intimate with it, we enter a flow state. And this is what I did during my ski career. And this is what people that you admire in business or in life in general do. They are not fearless. They come across as fearless because they're having an intimate relationship with their fear. And thus that doesn't feel like fear. It feels more like aliveness, excitement, maybe presence, whenever you become intimate with any part of life, you're in a flow state. Like sex, for example. If you're having a really intimate moment with your partner, you're in a flow state, right? So intimacy, actually, it comes from, there's a very famous Zen master, Dogen Zenji, who lived 800 years ago. And his quote is that enlightenment is intimacy with all things. But we don't use the word enlightenment anymore. We're now calling it flow state, but it's pretty much the same thing. So to modify his quote for today's day and age, flow is intimacy with all things. And so intimacy is what we're going for with fear. So back to what we originally started with, fear does not take us out of a flow state. It's our reaction to the fear that takes us out of a flow state. If we're in resistance to the fear, that's what takes us out of a flow state. But if we embrace it and become intimate with it, it's the very thing that takes us into a flow state.
No, and so talk to us about how do people, obviously, first of all, how do you overcome the resistance, right? Is it sort of the Seth Godin monkey brain? Is it, talk to us a bit about the resistance, right? Because I think in today's world, we're taught to resist everything, right? Say no before you say yes. And I think a lot of people probably do that in their own head, right? They say no and try to push it away when, the resistance might be actually the good part of it. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I love how you phrase that, because we're so used to trying to overcome fear, but instead we need to overcome the resistance to fear. And so fear is not the awful feeling. It's our resistance to the fear that's actually the awful feeling that we associate with fear. It's the feeling of, I don't want. And so what's the opposite of I don't want is, well, I do want. I do want to feel this. Easier said than done, especially if you've declared war against fear your whole life, right? And we have, I mean, in our culture, we have declared war against it. It is seen as the enemy number one. And so how you make that transition is, first of all, get to know your unique relationship with fear. And are we going to do a breakaway session?
We can do
We've
another
already-
one. We did earlier, but we can do one, and coming up here in breakout sessions. So we can pull
Just-
that off.
To give a little bit of
I'm willing
framework
to
on
stay here
time.
as long as you guys want. I'm so sorry for being, I'll be here for 24 hours if I need to make up
That's
for that.
fine.
This. So why don't we not do that, but we can have a conversation about what level do you think that you are? So I'm just asking the audience to get to know their unique relationship with fear right now. Raise the antenna. Like if you have a radio and the antenna's down, old school radios, of course, it's just static. Like we may think that we have one relationship with fear, but by really examining it, we find that we have a different relationship with fear entirely. So raise your antenna right now and maybe write in the chat, what is your unique relationship with fear? How do you resist it? There are 7.5 billion different people on the planet. So there are 7.5 billion different ways to resist fear. And some of the ones that I've seen, I kind of talked about them, is ignoring it, in denial of it, saying there's nothing to be afraid of, rationalizing it away. Just getting to know how your unique relationship with fear manifests is absolutely the first step. Because you can't get out of prison if you don't even know what kind of prison you're in. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. And I have this list of ways that I see people, I call it the flight list, run away from fear. And some of the things that we do aren't just words like control or trying to conquer it or manage it or all of that. But we make ourselves so busy that we don't have to deal with it. We become obsessive cleaners, so that we don't have to deal with it. We get addicted to shopping, drugs, alcohol. Those are ways to not have to deal with fear. The list goes on, including back to my niece. Like, she is a straight A student. Like, she works so hard to be perfect in school so that she doesn't have to deal with her fear. So just notice what your unique relationship is with fear. And that's the first part to turning this relationship around.
How do you move to acceptance, right? That's next. How do you start accepting that, right?
For some people that are so out of touch with their fear and completely out of touch with their bodies, like the reason why so many people in our culture are in their heads is oftentimes just so that you don't have to feel fear in your body. So it really comes down to acceptance is still in your head. It's like understanding something intellectually, like, okay, fear is normal and natural. And let's all do that right now. Let's just shift to acceptance right now. Like, first of all, we're acknowledging our resistance. We're kind of owning our resistance. And now we're shifting to acceptance. Like, can you accept, and say this to yourself right now, fear is normal and natural. It's not a sign of personal weakness. It's not a character flaw. I am supposed to be feeling this. Life is very scary. I'm not just about love, I'm also about fear. And I mean, we're on this little blue marble hurling through space, 186, I think, 1,000 miles per hour. I'm always wondering, why isn't it windier? But it's like, it's scary. Like, we are coming in contact with difficult people all the time. We have a pandemic going on. We have fear of rejection. Like, what is your greatest fear? It's probably everybody's greatest fear. There's no end in sight of things to be afraid of. Like, this is, in the words of I don't know if the Buddha said this, but you're born and then you die, and in between you suffer. I mean, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of negativity to life, anger and sadness. All of these things are normal and natural. And so acceptance, can you just say that, these words to yourself right now? Like, life is difficult. It's normal and natural to feel fear. It's not a sign of personal weakness. Now, if you say this in public, if you start to accept it and say these things out loud, like I was about to give a speech one time and it was about fear, and my mom, and she knows what I teach, she says, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "Well, I'm really scared." And she said, "Oh, there's nothing to be afraid of." I'm like, "Mom, shut up," right? Like, if we start to say these things in public, like it's normal and natural, usually what happens, people say, "Oh, but you don't want to let that get the better of you." They'll finish with a comma, right? But you want to let that go. And we're right back to resistance. So while acceptance is a step in the right direction, and notice when you say that, it makes you feel better, but then notice that we might just kind of want to go right back to resistance afterwards. So how do we move on to embracing and acceptance? Does anybody have any questions though? Because I'm kind of talking a lot and giving a lot of but
yeah, if anyone has questions, type them into the chat.
Let me
Tim,
let me just interject for one quick second. So we have until the top of the hour, which technically is another 5 minutes. However, considering Kristen came in a little bit late, and we're all going to be hanging out for another half hour or so at least. So you're welcome to please stay on. I also want to let everyone know that we are planning a deeper dive into these topics with Kristen on December 1st. We'll shoot an email out to everyone around being a part of a small group, like a 2-hour small group, deeper program on December 1st that we're gonna do with Kristen as well too. And before we jump into that and kind of do some of these, I do have some follow-up questions that are coming out of here too. If you could put into the chat one specific question that you would want to have answered, either for your personal life, sport, or business, what would be the question around fear that you would want to have answered that would make a big impact in your life? If you could answer this one question about fear, what would that be? Please put a question into the chat room. What's your one question around fear, about handling it, changing your relationship with it, whatever, and just we'd love to capture some of those and just see what they have. See what you guys are all thinking there around that one question. So we had one question, and Ken, you can jump back in here, but one, some of the from the chat there was, do you think we'll actually be able to see a shift in how the mainstream thinks about fear?
I don't think that it's going to happen in my lifetime, unless I work 24/7 and these things take time. It's such a deeply established norm that we see fear as a negative. We're making mistakes. We're making them in the right direction though. And it's definitely gotten to a tipping point where we have to do something different. But the question is, how much can people change and how fast? And I think that it really has to start with the next generation. And the next generation is going to come from the current generation. I mean, teenagers right now are struggling. And right now we're headed on a disastrous course where pretty soon we're all going to be medicated, which is medicating fear away. And it's like a modern lobotomy. Yes, you don't have to deal with fear, but you lose 20 to 40% of your aliveness in the process. And that's no life. So this message is, when I first started passing it around about 5 years ago in a bigger way, well, I guess 3 years ago when my book came out, I could find nobody else that had this message. And now I can find about 15 people. And so we're slowly gathering in numbers. And I feel like we are the people that are on this call and the people that are willing to try and do something completely radically opposite. Like, what's the definition of insanity? My next book actually is going to be called The Definition of Insanity. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Like, we're not going to get any different results than we have. The anxiety and fear industry has had decades upon decades upon decades to prove itself and help us feel better. And unfortunately, it's not working. We've come up with some amazing Band-Aids or symptom control. But in order to deal with the core issue, we have to, just stop what we're doing, completely reboot, and try something completely different and head in the completely radically opposite direction, which is, instead of seeing fear as an enemy, and this is actually my second hot tip, besides getting to know your unique relationship with fear. And this is actually the tip that's going to take you into embracing and also intimacy with fear, is that we need to start seeing fear as a positive. Like, I only see fear as a positive thing. That's it. There's no good fear and bad fear. There's only fear. It's kind of like the dog, right? There's no good dog and bad dog. The dog is just the dog. But the second we start mistreating it, it's going to be a bad dog. Or the second and I know people immediately go to training it, right? But it's like, you want to honor the dog too, right? And let the dog be the dog. And when the dog doesn't behave the way that you want the dog to behave, then he's a bad dog, right? So if you want to get the best out of the dog, you want to not beat him, but actually love and nourish him, nourish his soul. And so, can we see fear as a creature or a person? I love to personify fear. Can we start to speak about this person in our life, this fear, in a positive way? Like, instead of saying, I want to conquer and overcome fear, we say, I want to embrace and have intimacy with fear. Like, notice how actually say that to yourself right now, inside. Maybe find the part of your body where you feel fear. For me, it's often in my throat and in my chest. Touch that part of your body right now and find your fear. And if it's in your head, just know that trapped water spills into every available space. And so maybe it's spilled over into your thoughts. Just touch your head and just say, hey, fear, I'm sorry I've been so mean to you. I'm going to start talking about you in a kinder way. I'm going to use positive language about you. I want to include you in my life in a positive way. So the second tip is just change the way we see fear and the way we talk about it. That's the big thing. Change the way we talk about it. And, to make it up to you guys that I was late, I'm going to actually send you a couple of presents. I'm going to, these are things that I saw on my website. And so I'm just going to give them to you. The first thing is that drift list that I mentioned to help you identify what your unique pattern is about trying to get away from fear. And the second thing is I'm going to send you a portion of my Change Your Language guide so that you can change the way that you talk about fear to use inclusion language. And then the third hot tip is to, like I just had you guys do, go back to touching that spot in your body. Like, start a practice where you learn how to find your fear and learn how to feel it in an honest way. And emotions, they don't want to be thought about, right? That's dealing with your emotions intellectually. You want to deal with your emotions emotionally. So can you learn how to feel them instead of think about them or talk about them? This is a matter of getting into your body and finding that feeling in your body before it gets kinked, and giving it when you think about feeling a person, right? You touch them, right? Can you touch them? Can you hug them? We're already at embracing. So shifting from thinking about our emotions to feeling them is the fear practice that I propose. And on December 1st, I'm going to show you guys more about how to do that.
No, and I love what you're saying there. And I think the physiological piece, we talked a little bit about that. Where does it manifest yourself? But if you actually put your hand on your, on your heart or on your chest or on your head or wherever it is, all of a sudden it almost feels like a sense of warmth, right? Of energy that is somewhat releasing itself. And that's a pretty cool thing, and Chris and I've told you, and we're telling here, others is, I've dealt with, anxiety with my life. And I love what you're saying is becoming friends with it. And all of a sudden you're much more intimate, like you were saying. And the funny thing is, and I think probably a lot of people here on this podcast are high performers in business, life, or in sport. And I think, or I know for myself, I feel anxious up until the point when I should feel anxious, but then I'm at peace, right? It's like I'm anxious and then all of a sudden you have to perform, and it's a whole different ball game. So it's, I loved what you're saying a bit about that.
I have there's one question here about the relationship between stress and fear. And you hear lots of times you hear like, there's good stress and bad stress, and you can feel if it's bad stress, it's going to have harmful effects, but good stress can prepare you for whatever the situation. What's the relationship between stress and fear?
Well, it's not so much that there's good stress and bad stress. There's only stress. And the second we judge it, then it becomes good or bad. But there is a thing about too little stress and not enough stress. And it's actually been proven by science that if you have a medium amount of stress, you're going to live your best life. You're going to actually live longer, And if you have not enough stress, that means that you're not stepping out of your comfort zone. You're not taking risks. You're not really going to have a reason for living or a reason for being because you're not challenging yourself. But if you have too much stress, which I think is the bigger issue, then, and let me tell you the difference between stress and anxiety. So stress, it's like, imagine you have like a piece of paper right in front of your face and it's all you can see. And that's when you just become super consumed with something. And fear is definitely part of the equation of stress. Like stress includes fear, but it's not limited to it. And so some stress is good, too much stress, not good, not enough stress, and it's just where you're consumed with something. Like, for example, a business launch, right? It will be very stressful because you're consumed by it. So anxiety is very different than stress, though. Anxiety is only stuck fear that's in your body. And any kind of anxiety is bad for you. And just notice right now while we're talking, something that you're stressed out about. And notice that you're consumed by it. Notice what that feels like in your body or in your mind. Now notice anxiety. And we're limited by words. And so it's a different word. And words take on a lot of, when words lose their meaning, culture collapses. And so just shift and notice now if you feel anxiety. And notice the subtle differences between the two. Anxiety for me feels like just a lump somewhere in my body, or it feels like fear to me, where stress just feels like consumption, like I'm just consumed. And so anxiety, stress is normal and natural, like we want to feel that. Anxiety is a sign that something has gone wrong. Sometimes stress is a sign that something's gone right? Like you don't want to have stress in your life all the time. You don't want to be consumed with something all of the time. But if you're ever bored, or if you're ever wanting to do another kind of work push, you want to introduce stress in your life. But if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling actual fear, that means that it's stuck in your body and it's time to have a fear practice so that you can get back and flow with that fear again. So can you guys sense, actually maybe mention in the chat room, can you feel the difference in your body or in your mind between stress and anxiety?
I think so. I think Tim has actually, do you have a couple other questions there, Tim, from a different perspective?
Yeah.
Anxiety is like a crushing weight. I know, like me, I feel it in my head, right? Or the back of my head. I think other people feel it in different parts of their body.
And you can become stressed out by fear, and that becomes all that you know. But anxiety, again, it's like, if you have anxiety, then that means that you're out of flow with fear and something's gone wrong. We do not want to feel anxiety. And another thing I'll say about stress is, let's say you are launching a new project, or you have something that you're very consumed with at work, or you're trying to figure out what's wrong with your relationship. Like, you know, you're just, it's all you can see. You're not going to sleep well. Like, that's just part of the deal, because you're in problem solving mode, and the stress is there to help you solve problems. And when you have anxiety, it's like, anxiety is fear jumping up and down, screaming at you, trying to get your attention. Like, pay attention to me. You've got to do something about me, not about launching the business or the relationship, but actually you have got to, and you can stress out about it. It's like you can become consumed with this anxiety that you feel. And that's when it's time to give it your full attention. So giving it your full attention is where you find the feeling of anxiety in your body, find that knot or that lump or wherever it's stuck. Like when you kick a hose, like it just recirculates round and round. Find that. It may also show up redirected as another emotion entirely, like anger or sadness. It could invade your thoughts. Just notice if it's anxiety that you're dealing with or stress. And if it is anxiety, then that's fear jumping up and down, trying to get your attention. And you start paying attention to it like a child, like, hey, pay attention to me, right? And if you continue to ignore it, block it out, drink it away, right? It's only going to get louder and louder. It's like the fear will not be denied. And so that's what the time when you feel anxiety, that you want to turn towards it and then have a fear practice, which is, all right, it's time for me to accept you. It's time for me to embrace you. Emotions want to be felt, right? And it's time for me to be intimate with you. And that's what is going to get that hose to unkink, and that you're going to be in flow again. And it happens very fast. Actually, there was a Harvard study. I'll finish with this. I've not finished the whole time together, but I'll just finish what I've been saying with this. There was a Harvard study done recently that if you try to conquer and overcome your fear and shut it up and quiet it down and rationalize it away and breathe in calm, breathe out fear, it works. 4 minutes, you're going to feel better, but not without long-term consequences. That fear is going to come back screaming louder than before, and your anxiety is going to grow and grow and grow over time until you have an anxiety disorder. The Harvard study also tested, if you do what I just suggested, turn towards it and, you know, become friends with it, it also comes down. Kind of anybody that has a child, you know that if you listen to your upset child, right, and really listen and embrace them and have an intimate moment with them, they calm right down, according to this study, in 4 seconds. And you have no long-term effects.
Perfect. Hey, Tim, I think you have a few more questions too.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for everyone for hanging on and engaging. Again, we're going to be doing a deeper dive with Kristen on December 1st, and we'll send out an email about that. So we're excited about that. So one of the questions here, what is if you could say the number one thing that you should do when you feel the emotion of fear, what would that be? Like you're feeling, you know, you could give it your top.
Change your internal language about it. Instead of saying, I need to get rid of this, or why won't this go away, or what can I do to get rid of this? Instead of, and this is radical. This is absolutely radical. Because some of the things that we do when we're feeling anxious is we meditate, we go to a yoga class, we do breathing exercises, breathing in calm, breathing out our fear or our anxiety. We go for a walk, you know, we go spend some time in nature, we go skiing. All these things absolutely make us feel better because we think of them as ways to deal with our anxiety, but actually they're ways to not deal with our anxiety. They're Band-Aids. You know, like yoga is not meant to be treatment for anxiety. You know, yoga is yoga. Meditation, you know, we've transformed meditation from what its original intention was to now include goals. Like meditation is not supposed to be treatment for anxiety. It actually cheapens it. So instead of like doing the things that you normally do to feel better, can you actually stay with the fear and go internal and find it in your body, touch that part of your body where you feel it. Notice if you're in resistance to it. Notice if you want to run away and go for a jog. Like, don't do that. You know, if you have issues with fear or anxiety, your coping mechanisms can oftentimes just be Band-Aids that actually cause a long-term problem down the road. Instead, just sit with it and touch that part of your body and breathe into that spot. Instead of breathing in calm and breathing out your fear, actually breathe in oxygen to your fear. Like it's like giving your fear some love. You know, here's some oxygen for you. And breathing out the hope of ever getting rid of the fear. Like sometimes I'll have a client do an exercise where they breathe in something they're afraid of. Like, I'm afraid that my business is going to fail. And they breathe out the hope of ever getting rid of that. Breathe in, worried my cancer will come back. Breathe out the hope of ever getting rid of that fear. Breathe in, I'm afraid that my child is growing up to be mean, you know, a mean kid. And breathe out the hope of ever getting rid of that. Like, can we learn how to just sit with our fear? And you'll probably cry, you know, because if you start dealing with your fear in an honest way, then a lot of the emotions that we lock in the basement, including sadness, will come out. It's like tears of joy. It's interesting that people see crying as being a joyful thing, but oftentimes when somebody feels incredible happiness, their sadness will now have a chance to actually come out. Like I was watching The Voice recently, and the winner, you know, they won and they were so happy and they were crying, but they weren't crying because they were happy. They were feeling happiness, but because they were able to actually feel their emotions at that time, they gave themselves permission to feel their emotions. They finally were able to feel all the sadness that they felt for 20 years of people not appreciating their singing, or just giving a performance and only 2 people show up. Like, all of that is in there, and they're feeling sadness at the same time that they're feeling their happiness. So tears of joy aren't just happiness, they're happiness plus sadness. So just kind of sit with those emotions and just know that a lot is going to come up for you. But if you can, I mean, if you can be a warrior and actually just sit, and let's do that right now, actually. Go internal and just find any kind of discomfort that you have in your body and touch that spot. It could be physical too. Usually if there's a physical ache or pain, like an old broken leg, there's an emotional component to it as well that maybe you haven't been dealing with. Like, touch that spot in your body that feels uncomfortable and just breathe into it. Give it some love. Stop trying to ignore it. Stop trying to run away from it, but actually spend some quality time with it, embracing it and being intimate with it. This is a fear practice. No longer resisting, not even just mere accepting. That's a step in the right direction, and it might be a huge step for somebody to just accept. It's a process. It requires effort, but it's a lot less effort than ignoring or trying to conquer fear your whole life. This war that we have against fear is the biggest world war we have. Our own wars that we have against our own bodies and our own emotions, it's not working for us. It's really hard to love another person if you don't love yourself, and you can't love yourself if you don't love your fear. This is a self-love practice that you're engaged in right now. finding that discomfort in your body and giving it some love, a hug, whatever your version of embracing is, this is self-love. Imagine if we all learned how to do this. Imagine if this was taught in schools.
So I can maybe thank you for sharing that. I have one other question maybe we could have, and then, have any final thoughts here. But in a couple different times, this question came into the chat, which is, how do you know what is real, fact or fiction? How do you know what is real? And if the fear you feel is actually something you're creating in your head, or something you should really pay attention to? Basically, is it fake? The difference between being a feeling of fear being fake or real.
I think the reason why, it's a great question. I think the reason why that question gets asked is because when fear, like I mentioned in the beginning, is supposed to flow into our bodies and through our bodies like water through a hose. And it's scientifically proven to first show up in our bodies. And if we were animals, we would have a flowing relationship with it, but we have these big brains and we've gotten into this habit of using our brains to solve the problem of fear. And anyway, so what happens, the hose gets kinked, and then the fear spills into, the fear actually shows up in three kind of distinct ways if you kink the hose, either as an exaggerated version of itself in the form of panic or anxiety, or it'll show up redirected in other ways that are a different emotion entirely, maybe as intense anger. If you don't want to feel fear, you have to feel something. Anger feels more powerful, or sadness because it feels more polite than anger. Or it could show up as excessive jealousy, and on and on. Or the third way is that it could spill into our thoughts and show up as fearful thoughts. And this will show up as maybe OCD or irrational fear. Fear can hijack your mind in the middle of the night, like I mentioned, when you're trying to sleep, and just show up monkey mind, crazy racing, because you're not dealing with your fear during the day. You got to deal with it at some point. So that's when fear is like, oh, I got his attention now, right? So we ask this question, how do you know if it's real? Well, if it's in your thoughts, then you're like, what the heck is going on? This seems crazy. And we think, okay, now it's time to just really hunker down and just rationalize, So we're dealing, there's actually a saying, who said this? Einstein, you cannot solve a problem by using the same consciousness that created it. You must learn to see the world anew. Because we're dealing with our fear intellectually, it kinks the hose, right? And then the fear moves to the place where we're living in order to get our attention. And next thing you know, it's doing backflips and it's doing crazy, and it's saying, well, what about this? And what about that? Mannequins and closed spaces, and and it starts to feel overwhelming and overbearing. But can you see where the core of the problem is that we're not in flow with our fear, and that's why it's invading our thoughts. So it's not an easy answer, but what I'm trying to say is, if we can get back into our bodies and learn how to feel fear rather than think about it, first of all, we're not going to have this question anymore. We can't trust what's in our mind to be real. Our mind lies. Our mind gets hijacked. Our mind is crazy. I'm a facilitator. I facilitate voice dialogue, and I facilitated our thinking mind and the voice of insanity in the same few moments. It's exactly the same. Like, our minds are insane, and in no small part because the fear is hijacking it and running its agenda. But if we learn how to just get back into our bodies and learn how to feel our fear in an honest way, then it won't wind up in our minds. And we won't have these crazy thoughts, and we won't even have to ask the question. So just the quick summary is, you can't trust your mind, it lies, but you can trust your body and what you feel. So we've got to get, away from thinking so much and go back and learn how to feel instead.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for for hanging out and engaging in this conversation with us. What I'd love to do is have everyone in the chat room, if you could, just thinking about this conversation, could you please type into the chat a word or two that highlights or summarizes something that struck home for you, or something that was provocative, or just something you'd like to share with the group as we're kind of moving towards closure. And if anyone has any burning questions, then we can type those in as well. Do want to remind everyone once again that we'll send out an email. We are recording this, so we'll have that made available. And again, on December 1st, I believe we're going to go with 5 p.m. Eastern on December 1st. We'll send out an email if people are interested in doing a small group
It's at 6.
follow-up to this program. What's that?
It's at 6 on Eastern. It's
Oh,
on
6
December
Eastern.
1st. It's going to be at 6 o'clock Eastern.
Okay.
And, we are going to explore how to get out of our heads and into our bodies on December 1st. And it really is a matter of, because we don't want to disrespect fear. We also don't want to disrespect our own minds. And so it's about honoring and embracing and being intimate with our own minds first, rather than, okay, we want to end the war with fear, but we don't want to start a war with our own minds, right? We want to honor all parts of us. And instead of trying to control or fight our own minds, which is another form of madness, I'm going to also be on December 1st talking about how to allow your mind to have, like if you're going to have a bull, you want to give it a big pasture, right? Let the mind just do what it's going to do.
Awesome. Hey, Ken, do you want to say a couple words about our next guest on December 3rd, our next adventure spotlight coming up?
We will. He's actually listening in as well. So our next guest is a friend of mine, another fellow skier that Kristen probably knows as well, Doug Lewis. Doug is a Olympic skier. Hahnenkamm, actually 5th place at the Hahnenkamm, most difficult downhill race in America, or actually in the world, not in America. World champion, 3rd place at World Championships, first American ever in the downhill, but became an entrepreneur and is really leading, sort of like what Kristen was saying, the next generation. He has a camp called Elite Team Camps. He's a CEO of, he runs both virtually and in person. Actually, my daughter's been to 2 of them and they've been life-changing and absolutely amazing. So he's going to be coming up on the 3rd, I believe, and it's going to be a good time. So Doug is here. It's going to be exciting to have him on, and we could have him, unmute him and say a few words.
He's there for you.
Oh, hey,
Doug,
everybody.
you're live.
Hey, everybody. Kristen, awesome. I always enjoy listening to you. I was at Kristen's Hall of Fame induction about 1.5 years ago or something in Salt Lake. So congratulations again, Kristen, for that. Yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit about fear for sure. I've lived on the accepting fear for a long time in my life. So this was a great talk, but we're going to talk about goal setting, committing, finding those deep, dark places and running to them instead of running away from them. And I also will talk about what I do and try to inspire and educate young athletes by becoming a more complete athlete. Everybody thinks ski racing is about carving the ski, or soccer is the kicking. It's all the other stuff, the sports physiology, the sports nutrition, and the sports psychology that makes a champion. And that's what I've been preaching and trying to educate for 30 years. So hopefully we can have a great discussion. So thank you for having me.
Awesome, Doug. No, it's going to be amazing. And thanks everyone, like Tim was saying, for hanging in here. I know we had a little glitch, but glitches happen, and overcome the glitches, and we're all there. So Kristen was awesome. Thank you very much. She sort of gave us the PhD in overcoming fear. It's going to continue on here. We'll send everything out, and I'm super psyched to check out some of her stuff that she'll be sending along. And Kristen, it was an honor to have you. So thanks for being part of this.
Right on. Thanks everyone for coming. And just as a reminder, if anyone's looking for their next virtual event, whether it's a guest speaker or gaming, magic, adventure themed programming, something to do some team building with your company, then reach out to us for that. We have a whole variety of different virtual programs, and we're very excited and want to have some ongoing feedback about your concepts. If you have a guest speaker that you'd like to see on our Adventure Spotlight, or a topic that you'd like to see, we're starting to get a long list of awesome, amazing people for rolling into the new year. So we're super excited about that and keeping this going, and making it as valuable as we possibly can. So thanks for being a part of this awesome adventure that we're creating together. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great, great afternoon. Again, thanks a lot, Kristen. We'll talk to you and see you all very soon.